Alright, what's going on everybody? Quancredible here. We are back from our short break from Black Clover, and I'm here to bring you the chapter review for chapter 204, which in my opinion is one of the better Black Clover chapters to date. We get a flashback with a little bit of context for what's going on now. I'm not going to ramble in the beginning, I'm just going to go straight into it. So the chapter starts with the Wizard King and Nero heading to the Shadow Palace, and it's a flashback happening while they're on their way. We get a little bit of backstory on Nero. So, as we already know, she does have sealing magic, but in this chapter, we also find out that she's a noble. We also see that she knows that the other nobles didn't really deem sealing magic as that useful or powerful, so she was basically appointed as the servant of the first Wizard King, or the Prince as he was known at that time. And of course, in their first meeting, she basically stumbles upon him in his room where he's working on a bunch of different magical tools and magical artifacts and researching. And then it's at this first glance that we get a hint of the first Wizard King's personality. He seemed to be very excited to hear about her sealing magic, which is reminiscent of Julius, but it's also kind of cool to see that he's not a clone of Julius or Julius isn't a clone of him. Like he was excited to see her magic, but he didn't necessarily fanboy like how Julius did, which is one thing that I think is really cool. I definitely like it when characters nowadays aren't necessarily direct copies of characters from the past. It's good to see that they are all their own thing. Like the first Wizard King is definitely, we can see in this first interaction, he's not like Julius or he's not the exact same as Asta or vice versa. He's his own person. And then also further on, we basically see that the first Wizard King, whose name I understand that we got it in this chapter, but depending on the adaptation you read or how you pronounce things, it could be pronounced as Lumiere or Lumiel, or it just depends. I read like three different ones and it all had his name spelled differently. So I'm going to keep referring to him as the first Wizard King until the official adaptation comes out. That's just me. Also, same thing for Nero. Depending on how you want to pronounce her name, it could be Circe, it could be Cersei, however you want to pronounce it. Like I said, waiting for the adaptation. But as I was saying, Nero was completely shocked that he was different from what she expected. She expected him to be kind of a jerk like all the other nobles were. But he was definitely a forward thinker. He basically wanted to make these magic tools to kind of level out the playing field, kind of so commoners can have a way to be seen as equals to nobles that had way more mana. This is also good to know because previously I had thought that the only reason nobles and royals had more magic was because of what happened 500 years ago when they stole the elves' mana or attacked them during the massacre. But it actually turns out they already just innately had more mana than commoners. So this has always been a thing. I think the massacre kind of just widened the gap even more. But then, even then, later on into the chapter, Nero notices that the Wizard King sneaks out with his sister all the time. And then she follows him once and she sees that he's meeting up with the leader of the elves, which is Lich. And they're both working together to kind of create like a more equal world. You know, it's definitely some good stuff. But then on the day of the ceremony, the day that Lich and Tiata or Tata, however you pronounce her name, first Wizard King sister, the day that they're supposed to be married, before the ceremony, the first Wizard King was summoned by his father, or so he had thought. It actually turned out that it was a trap, more than likely set up by the devil. To which, as soon as he comes in, he says bind or prohibit, showing off that he can use his word magic, even though he doesn't necessarily have a body at this point in time. He's more of just this dark, ghastly form. He definitely reminds me of Ghastly, the Pokemon. I'm not for sure how many of you are Pokemon fans, but he's basically Ghast. The first Wizard King does seem to be familiar with what he is, just because he's done tons of research and knows a lot of things. And then as the devil starts to divulge into his plan a little bit, basically letting the first Wizard King know that he basically tells him that he's going to massacre the elves and make it appear that it was him or someone else. To which the first Wizard King immediately starts to try to get out of the bindings, but even he can't escape the word magic, which is pretty crazy considering that the devil was in his sealed form, or like not even full power form or anything like that. He was just that ghastly being, and he was still able to bind him. Some time passes, and Nero comes in, and she's able to dispel it pretty easily. And then this is where matchups come back into play with Black Clover. The first Wizard King, there's definitely no doubt about it. He has tons and tons and tons of more mana than Nero probably does, but he wasn't able to break out. But Nero was, because that's literally what her magic is made to do, is break out of things. So that's just, I also thought that that was cool, just showing how matchups are still important in Black Clover no matter what. And then, of course, as they arrive, they come to see all of the elves' bodies. Literally, everyone's dead except for Lich. And you also see the same thing happening with him that we've seen with Partry. Um, his grimoire turned into a 5-leaf clover grimoire. We even see that some of his eye is starting to darken, and there's like blood on his face. I kind of think that this blood on his face is symbolistic of what the elves have on their face currently. I don't think the blood on his face has something to do with what they have on their face in the current story. That theory is not fleshed out, but anyway, it seems at the very last second, he regains his heart. He doesn't fall completely into despair like how Partry did. So using all of the negative mana inside of him and the magic stones, he uses what the devil referred to in this adaptation that I'm going off of as a forbidden magic. He used it on himself. And we even see in the last panel, it appears that he used it to turn himself into that giant demon thing that we see in the opening of Black Clover all the time. And then, of course, he asked the first Wizard King to kill him. And that was the chapter. There's a lot to take away from here. A lot of information filled in. This chapter was really good. I've been asking for a flashback chapter for a really long time. My boy Josuke was predicting a flashback chapter for a really long time. So it was definitely good to see. Some of the takeaways from this one would be, like I said earlier, there's always been a gap between nobles and royals in terms of their magic power versus commoners and peasants. Also, it appears that the first Wizard King was the main pusher for magic tools. I guess the only things that I'm kind of curious about that I don't know if they're going to touch on in the next chapter or if we're just not going to hear anything about it at all is they still didn't really tell us exactly where the devil came from. He kind of was just there. So they don't really say. I don't know if he like kind of seeped out of another world and popped up or if he's just always been around. That part's a little confusing. I'm kind of getting like some dwarf in the flash vibes if you guys ever have seen Full Metal. I guess my only problem with the whole magical tools being used to destroy the elves is how did they know? Like, how did someone else know how to use the inventions that he made? That one's just kind of weird to me. It doesn't take away from the chapter that much, but I just thought that was strange that he somehow whoever he controlled or convinced to do this just knew how to use it. And then as for my predictions for the next chapter, I definitely think next chapter is going to be the wrapping up of the flashback chapters. I know a lot of people don't like flashbacks at all because it gets you away from the main story. You spend times away from the main characters, this and that. It doesn't progress the plot technically. I mean, a flashback can never progress the plot if it's only just filling things in. But I, for one, am a big fan of flashbacks. They flesh out the current happenings of the story a lot. I definitely don't want to see this flashback run a really long time since there's not really much you can talk about. But hopefully in 205 we'll get to see, I guess, Demon Lich go on a bit of a rampage there and then the first Wizard King stop him. So all in all, great chapter. This one is a 9 out of 10 for me. Really, honestly, it's probably like a 9.5, honestly. I really like flashback chapters. And this one progressed well. So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. What are your predictions? What do you guys think is going to happen in the next chapter? Let me know. We'd love to talk about this a little bit. Like and sub if you enjoyed the video. And I will catch you guys next time.